My name is Matthew Todd, and welcome to Inside the Scale-Up. This is the podcast for founders and executives in tech looking to make an impact and learn from their peers within the tech business. We lift the lid on tech businesses, interviewing leaders and following their journey from startup to scale-up and beyond, covering everything from developing product market fit, funding and fundraising models to value proposition structure and growth marketing. We learn from their journey so that you can understand how they really work, the failures, the successes, the lessons along the way, so that you can take their learnings and apply them within your own startup or scale-up and join the ever-growing list of high-growth UK SaaS businesses. Here today, really excited to be joined by Paul Zimmerman from Invotra. Good morning, good to have you on the podcast today.
Hi, Matt. Lovely to be here. Thanks for having me.
No problem at all. Really looking forward to the conversation. I think it will bring something different. I don't think we've had a company that's quite like Invotra on the podcast, which is a good thing. I think it brings a bit of diversity in terms of the type of products you've got, the type of clients that you're currently working with as well. And so, as always, I'd like guests to introduce themselves, introduce their business, rather than me do it on their behalf. So, yeah, over to you. Tell us a little bit about yourself and Invotra. Great.
Thanks again for having us. So my name's Paul. I basically I've got a background in, funnily enough, e-commerce. So I joined a small company called Amazon.com back in 1999. I wound up running their music division for about 4 years here in the UK. I was part of the early retail management team for Amazon, where we did a huge amount of expansion and growth in the UK. I spent several years in e-commerce. I worked for Play.com, if you remember them, and Firebox, a small little online gift retailer in Shoreditch. And then I had a very good friend named Fintan Galvin, who's the CEO of Invotra, who contacted me. We've been talking for a number of years and we're close personal friends. And he said, I'm thinking about turning my dev agency into a product company, and would you be interested in joining? And long story short, that was Invotra. So I joined Invotra about 8 years ago. And Invotra is an enterprise intranet delivered on a SaaS basis. So we are basically doing internal communications, intranets, extranets, portals, knowledge management hubs. And we do that for very large enterprises. Yeah. It's funny when you talk to somebody on the outside, you say, what is an enterprise to you? And you get lots of different answers about what enterprise is. So typically we hear, sometimes if you're working like really small enterprise, you'll hear the answers will be around 1,000 people to maybe 5,000 people. Yeah. Our sweet spot is basically north of like 5,000 and even upwards of 120,000 end users. So we'll get onto a little bit of our client mix in a second. I think another thing that might be interesting for you and your listeners is the fact that we're bootstrapped. So we've never taken external funding, never taken bank loans to fund our growth. Yeah. We've done it very carefully. There's a handful of companies out there that continue to be kind of bootstrapped in a traditional sense. And I think that's a really interesting topic for us to explore is, why do some tech companies decide to go down the bootstrap route and try to fund all their expansion themselves versus go to the capital markets and find institutional investors or VCs or angels to kind of spur their growth. And I think that's an interesting topic for us to explore as well. So it kind of gives you hopefully a little bit of a quick intro into who we are and what we do. And when you're ready, we can talk about sort of customer mix and all that good stuff, who we're kind of selling to and why we're doing that. Yeah, no, absolutely.
That's really interesting and good to hear about your background as well as how Invotra kind of got off the ground as well, kind of moving from that dev agency to a product platform. And yeah, I guess it would be interesting to kind of start with what that customer base looks like. You mentioned different, like enterprise means different things to different people. I think it definitely does. And I think a lot of startups and even people at the scale up stage can often be a little bit scared of tackling the enterprise market and feeling that they're not ready and they might have to start smaller. But I think that can often end up with quite a different product, which may even prevent them from getting to their target market. So I'd love to hear a bit more about the kind of the selection of that market and what it looks like for them.
Absolutely. And that is actually a very, very good topic. So why did we go down the enterprise SaaS route versus what I would say the pure play SaaS route? What are the differences between it? So let's pick up on that. So So yeah, when you go to a conference like SaaStr, Matt, I don't know if you've been to SaaStr in San Jose, the Bay Area, or SaaStr Europe, or if you've been to SaaS Talk over in Dublin. But when you
Yeah.
meet SaaS companies, you've got sort of one or two sort of camps that they fall into. One is they've got a product, it is completely automated, it is on their own website, or it's an application or a product that is just sitting on a phone, for instance, or a mobile operating system.
Yeah.
And it's what we would call touchless. So you're looking for customers to kind of use that SaaS product without ever even talking to somebody. And numerous applications or SaaS products out there are sort of good examples of that pure SaaS play. The other end of the spectrum is enterprise SaaS, where there's a lot of manual onboarding processes. There's a lot of heavy lifting. There's maybe content migration. There's things like that. High reliance, for instance, from a client standpoint, on security and performance. So as you get accustomed to dealing with larger customers, you have to deal with those bigger issues, and that involves a lot of non-automated, non-manual sort of processes. And that's kind of where we wound up going to. We went there mainly by accident rather than by design. So as I said at the beginning, we were a dev agency. We had a lot of experience in Drupal. So we actually, our dev agency was formerly known as IO1, and IO1 was one of the very first entrants to the Drupal market several years ago. I'm thinking 20 years ago now, probably.
Okay.
We knew Dries, our teams knew Dries, who founded Drupal, and then Dries emigrated to America and founded Acquia. We were at the very first Drupal cons. We had and still have actually, a former lead for Drupal's security team globally was on our teams.
Yeah.
And so we were solving a lot of Drupal problems for people. And as you may know, Matt, so a lot of sort of public sector departments and enterprises actually decided to adopt Drupal, either for their external facing websites or their internal communication needs.
Yeah.
Here in the UK, we wound up doing some work on some rescue projects for the Cabinet Office. It started off, I would say, maybe 9-10 years ago. The Cabinet Office called our guys in, and basically we did a rescue project on a project called data.gov.uk. That was fairly well known at the time, and the architects who worked on that project scattered across central government. One of them went to work for the Home Office, and the Home Office got to talking to us about our ability to use Drupal to make internal communication systems. And again, probably 9 years ago now, Home Office kind of said to us, hey, why don't you make your internet product into a SaaS product? If you did that, we'd love to sort of procure that from you. And I think that even predated the digital marketplace, G-Cloud. So we did that, and we wound up working very, very closely with the Home Office. And to this day, the Home Office is our longest standing customer, having been with us for all those nine years now. From the Home Office, we then wound up, and this is actually something that I think people who've got experience with the public sector will find, is that actually, firstly, you have a tendency to do longer term deals with public sector. So they have a sort of they're less likely to churn on you. They've got sort of longer scale budgets and timeframes. And we found that to be true for sure. From the Home Office, we wound up working with the likes of HMRC and the Department for Works and Pensions, two of the larger government departments. So HMRC has 75,000 civil servants working for them, and DWP, the Department for Works and Pensions, which for your American listeners is kind of like an amalgamation of the Department of Labor and Department of Social Security over here, where you've got two very large departments that are merged into one over here called the Department for Works and Pensions. Well, DWP's got 120,000 end users, and we serve those guys each and every single day. So every Job Center Plus here in the country, Matt, every single Job Center Plus, the employees and civil servants who work in those, they're known as JCPs internally. They basically are using our intranet each and every single day. So So that's we went from there to kind of other government departments. We wound up working with the Department for Transport. During lockdown, we won Test and Trace, and we're working very closely with the NHS. We also have a big NGO in America, over in Oakland, California, is one of the largest environmental organizations in North America, called Sierra Club, which is a cause really close to my heart. They've got several thousand volunteer members who use us all the time. So yeah, that's kind of where we wound up going to. We wound up playing in the large enterprise market. So very early in our experience, we found out about the importance of a few things. Live service, right?
Yeah.
So if you're running a large scale SaaS, you quickly understand the importance of not ever being down and having service delivery management systems. So you get a really good sense of basically what's important to large numbers of end users. If I was running a pure SaaS, a pure play SaaS, you actually, as an end user, Matt, you probably have found this where you're using an application and occasionally, very rarely, hopefully, but occasionally you'll see that app is down or the service is down. And you just check in maybe an hour later and it's back up and running, that kind of thing. For us, we have mission critical internal communication systems that are running in large parts of the UK government. So you can't afford to be down. And what we had to do early on was figure out how to invest in our live service management system and our service delivery. And that was a huge part of our culture in the beginning, in the early days. So I'll give you an example. So we were speaking at the beginning about the differences between bootstrapped and taking external funding. You have choices to make all the time. And as a founder, I would encourage your listeners to really think carefully about where they take funding from before they then, take a decision that they maybe regret in the future. Increasingly, every single day that goes by, it becomes easier and easier to build a technological platform or an app or a service, and then to roll that out to tens of thousands, if not millions, of users.
Yeah.
And so, if you think back to like 20 years ago, for instance, it probably was a good decision to take VC funding. Today, you've got operators working out of a bedroom who are building an app and putting it onto Apple's App Store or Google's App Store and basically hitting millions of users within a couple of weeks. So we had some choices to make. And one of the choices we had to make as a bootstrap company was to invest heavily into live service. So we have, a very strong background in understanding what a service delivery or live service team at a large enterprise requires.
Okay.
Things like understanding their change management programs. What do they go through when you need to put something into the live environment? When you want to roll some bit of new functionality to the front end, what does that look like?
Yeah.
How do you do that? How do you plan that? How do you talk to the customers about that? And so that's a huge part of our early stage of our growth. So can you imagine, just to give you a sense of this, can you imagine basically if you're running a SaaS product and you've got the 35,000 employees or civil servants of the home office and it goes down, right?
Yeah, that's not good.
You've got a P1 for like basically, I don't know, let's say 6 hours. People will start to notice. If they really need that service, they're going to really start to notice. So you can imagine, as a bootstrapped company, we were heavily reliant on investing in things that we felt were way more important than perhaps sales and marketing. And that goes to the heart of that decision that I was talking about at the outset about being basically bootstrapped versus taking the fund. If you're going to be bootstrapped, you're going to wind up doing things like investing heavily in product and tech and ensuring that live service is up and running 24/7 in the early stages of your investment. And so you think about it, you're going to hire your talent, your resource, all of that. You're going to hire early and invest early in your product and your tech and that live service to ensure that it is up and running as much as possible and that it's performant.
And how did that feel then, kind of initially, saying yes to a client that's going to give you tens of thousands of users in the early days? That must be pretty scary, wondering and hoping that the tech will hold up and the architecture's going to deliver what's needed.
Well, yeah, absolutely. I mean, it's a really, really interesting one, right? Because we've got some very sort of bright folks who work for us, and we have had for a number of years. And I think that that's, again, one of those things. You've got to have real strong faith in your ability to deliver the tech and the product that you promised, you said you would do. We may get onto this, but we're big fans of AWS. We've been working with AWS services for as long as they've been around in the UK. We were one of the early users of AWS services, and I think when you've got the backing of somebody very large like an AWS, and obviously there are other sort of cloud providers out there. I think you've got that helps give assurance to people like security architects in large organizations. We obviously go through a heck of a lot. I was going to come on to security, but I might as well talk about it now. Security is one of those things where you have to prove to people that you are strong enough and performant enough to deliver whatever you can in a secure manner. So some of the steps that we took, we regularly have penetration testing of our application and service. That is done for our customers who pretty much demand that. We went through the ISO 27001 accreditation process about 6 years ago, and we've then had I think it's called the audit ever since then, and successfully passed that with no nonconformities each time that we've gone through the audit process. We've actually developed a culture, Matt, of being highly aware of and security conscious of imagine if you had a CISO, right, in your organization, and then they were like, I'm struggling to get the comms out about how important security is. For us, security is like paramount. We actually have gamified security. So we moved offices several times through our history. One of the times we were working in a smaller office, we didn't have a dishwasher. And so we used to try to get into other people's laptops, other employees' laptops. And we did this for fun. Okay. So if somebody left an unmanned laptop open and accessible, then if you could get in there and type the word dishes into somebody's main team chat, for instance, then suddenly the whole company would see that. And that person would wind up having to wash the dishes in the old office. And we use that to this day. So we call it dishing somebody, where you basically go and you find somebody's laptop. If it's open, you try to get into it. Now, obviously, we're gamifying security consciousness there. But what we're also trying to do is ensure that we have a little bit of fun when you're dealing with the highly important issue of security. Many of our laptops, for instance, that we would have worked with in the past would have been laptops that are provided by UK government departments. Okay. And so you would have had to have security clearance to be using those. And that was one of those things where if we've got all these SC cleared laptops lying around the office, we do not want anyone to be leaving those open and accessible to anyone who's non-security cleared. So it was a real issue for our public sector customers, and we made a point of driving security consciousness through the culture of who we are at Invotra today. So we've got a couple other things that we talked about. I mean, I think that when we're basically security conscious, at the beginning of being a bootstrap company, you're security conscious, you're investing product and tech. You're also trying to figure out what can you do to differentiate yourself from other sort of SaaS products that are similar. So we kind of compete with the likes of Microsoft and SharePoint, right? So you think about this. I mean, SharePoint, got a massive thing. It's a massive product. Microsoft themselves, obviously a behemoth of a company, and we kind of have to compete with them. So we're kind of probably frenemies with Microsoft. We have to integrate with them often. So we do a lot of integration work with Active Directory. We have to do a huge amount of integrations with other Microsoft products, and Microsoft 365, for instance, and that kind of thing. We do a lot of search integration stuff with them as well. But also, at the same time, we're probably competing head on with SharePoint. And most of the time that our customers are talking to us, they're going, we really don't like SharePoint anymore. We want to have an alternative to the big SharePoint in the sky sort of thing. Well, when you're investing early on from a bootstrap standpoint, you're trying to find ways to kind of differentiate yourself between yourself and those large competitors. We did that in two ways. But the first way, from a product standpoint, that's really important to us is the subject of accessibility. So we were always AA compliant, right?
Okay.
For years, we were AA compliant on accessibility issues. And then we had one of our larger customers, DWP, invited us up. Now, they invited us up to see their end users who have site issues. And they said, listen, we believe that you're AA compliant and never doubt that you are trying your best to be highly accessible. But we'd actually like you to come up and sit with our end users who have site issues and sit down with them and try to use your intranet as a SaaS product. We said, okay. So we went to Blackpool, Leeds, York, offices of theirs in London. And the very first meeting that we ever had with them and our product teams, the employees from DWP turned off the monitor and they went, okay, now use your product.
Yeah, nice.
And it was a bit of a wake up call. It'd be hugely challenging. And I would encourage all of your listeners to explore accessibility issues, WCAG 2.1 compliance. If you're interested, you can hit our website and you can explore what we've done there. But we found that culturally, we could actually differentiate ourselves from the bigger players out there by responding to customer needs on something like accessibility issues.
I see, yeah.
It turns out that roughly 8% of DWP's workforce have got a sight issue of some sort. Now, that could be full blindness all the way up to sort of mild color blindness or a sort of color differentiation when they're reading certain things. Like I'm looking at an app right now where we're doing the podcast recording. There's a red call to action button. And I'm looking at other things on the screen. They all look sort of make sense to me. But if you've got certain sight issues, they may not make sense. And so it's being able to pay attention to those accessibility issues. We worked exceptionally hard on driving accessibility awareness throughout our entire company. It's now become a good part of our culture. Before lockdown, we used to have permanent offices, and we had an accessibility lab in those offices where you could mimic certain site issues using various vision impairment glasses. And we would encourage our employees to put those on, experience what it was like. I've spoken publicly at conferences where I've encouraged people around at a conference with 250 people to put on a night mask to mimic full blindness, and then listen to screen readers and turn up the screen readers to what somebody who I call it fluency, somebody who's completely fluent in screen reader technologies. Listen to it at the speed that somebody with massive sight issues, they have to listen to screen readers at, and it's like a foreign language. I don't know if you've ever listened to it, Matt, but it's pretty darn impressive. So as a bootstrap company, you find it's incredibly important to find something that you can be really, really super excellent at that your larger competition has ignored. I think it's a really, really good advantage.
Yeah, and I think that's really interesting, and I think the accessibility is an excellent point. I've worked with a few kind of clients with different SaaS apps, and most don't pay attention to accessibility. The ones that do are using off-the-shelf solutions, but it's very rare to find a company going to those lengths and depths that you have. And one thing I wonder as well is when you have clients with so many employees, there must be so much diversity in terms of job function alone, let alone how personal and individual differences in terms of how they experience any given platform or intranet or area of an intranet. How do you even get customer feedback and know what quality customer feedback looks like when your clients have that many people working with them and using the platform?
It's a really, really great question. And I think that the whole accessibility challenge that was given to us by our lead customers, kind of first and foremost, when you're dealing with a customer that's got tens of thousands of end users, and particularly I think in public sector, I think this is increasingly a challenge for large enterprises anywhere. You could be a large private sector company in, say, oil and gas, media, technology, real estate, whatever. But there's an obligation, if you're public sector large department to be very inclusive and diverse. And in fact, actually, you'll see that there's diversity and inclusion champions all throughout the public sector, as well there should be.
Yeah.
And I think that one of the things that the accessibility challenge gave us was this kind of like, we already were a very diverse organization. So we have a very diverse board from a gender standpoint. We've got what we call, Matt, a meritocracy in our organization. So we believe very strongly about a meritocracy approach, meaning that somebody can join today. They could be an 18-year-old apprentice. I'm going to come on to apprenticeships here in a bit because it's a really important point for how you grow as a bootstrap company again. But you could be an 18-year-old apprentice, come into our organization. You have to have an open and transparent culture that allows for people to get feedback and to then to ask questions. We have several meetings where we encourage the entire company to join. I kind of book in 2 meetings every week. There's a Monday morning sort of kickstart around 10 a.m. Everyone joins the call. It's nice and easy at the beginning, and we talk about everyone's weekends and how they are. And I make sure that everyone around the table gets a chance to sort of tell us what's going on in their lives. Yeah. Especially when you're remote working, and especially during this lockdown period, when that we're just emerging out of, you're asking for people to really kind of commit on a sort of remote basis and tell us what happened in their in their personal lives. And on Fridays, then we also do a bit of a tools down at 4:00. Everyone grabs a drink of some sort, and basically then they dial into a bit of a deep dive where we go deep into a subject like accessibility, for instance, and we might get an update from the team that's working on those, what they're doing on accessibility from a product standpoint. Now those 2 meetings are showcases where anyone can ask anything. And that 18-year-old apprentice can put their hand up and ask our CEO and our founders. They can ask us any questions that they want, right? And we will answer them to the best of our ability. We will answer them always. That openness and that transparency is what our large customers have always demanded of us. As in, that's what they are looking to promote themselves.
I see.
So when we look at our home office, when we look at a sort of a DWP or Department for Transport or any large organization, they represent society. They represent society insofar as their makeup. So you have to be a diverse and inclusive organization if you're going to want to be able to talk to them about what their end user needs are. Most of the time we would, so I'll give you a good example about this. So DWP, they're 120,000 end users. A lot of their teams are late adopters, not early adopters.
Yeah.
So if you think about this, a lot of the civil servants who work at a large organization like DWP, they are going to be people who've come to technology late in their lives, maybe are not as au fait with it as folks like you and me, I'm assuming, Matt. Yeah. Or like my teenage daughters who basically have been on TikTok and Snapchat for years and using all sorts of other apps and using only mobile and never watch TV and all that kind of stuff. And so you've got to learn how to talk and set up really personas with your customers, getting to know the main personas of your target organization, your target sort of customer or prospects. It's so essential that you speak their language. Right? That you understand culturally the makeup of that organization, who they are, why do they go to work and do what they do? Who are they? How do they get their jobs done? And most importantly, from a sort of user need standpoint, is what do they need from the product that you're trying to pitch them, that you're trying to sell to, right?
Yeah, I think that's really interesting. And when you think of organizations of that size, and I can imagine there are a lot of people resistant to change as well. So I imagine it must be a challenge to innovate and deliver value, across an organization of that size. But I think it's a really interesting point that you mentioned, that it's the bigger companies are often a better reflection of kind of the diversity that is in society. Whereas if you stick to very small businesses and, some of the smaller they are, almost the less that will be kind of present in the organization, and the less personas there will definitely be.
Yeah, absolutely. I mentioned another talking point that I thought would be interesting for anyone who's kind of interested about how do I grow from a bootstrap standpoint? Because
Yeah.
if you're bootstrapped, you really are kind of cash constrained, and you really don't have a lot of sort of you can't hire a lot of high paid salary techies.
Yeah.
So we've been working on our apprenticeship program for a large number of years. So
Okay.
we hired 2 apprentices as our first ever apprenticeships programs. We hired 2 on the same day, and that was mainly because our founders could not decide who out of the 2 they should select.
Yeah.
And again, we stumbled into something that is hugely beneficial, which is we created a buddy system for our apprentices when they start.
Okay.
So nowadays we have about, I would think, 60% of our staff are either apprentices or ex-apprentice graduates.
Oh, wow.
We promote them heavily. We promote apprentices very strongly within our organization. In the last year, we have made 3 ex-apprentices into directors of their subsidiary companies. At Invotra, which is now a subsidiary of our group company, the MD is one of those 2 very first ever apprentices to have joined us. At the age of 18, he did not even know HTML. And now, for many years, he headed up our product, and now he's leading Invotra, the company itself. Apprentices and the apprenticeship programs are hugely beneficial because you can develop talent the way that you specifically need it from an organizational standpoint. And it gives you just a wonderful way to kind of have almost like a kind of a collegiate kind of feel in your organization as people grow and develop over like the years that they're taking their apprenticeship program. It's one of those things that if you're bootstrapped and you're wondering how to grow your talent, if you've got a long-term view, really strongly think about apprenticeship programs and how to invest in those from your talent growth standpoint.
Yeah, I think that's really good advice. We've had a couple of people on the podcast talking about apprenticeships, even people running apprenticeship platforms. But I think it's something that I don't see that much of with clients that I work with. And I think it is something that should be encouraged. And I think maybe a lot of people aren't actually aware of what an apprenticeship is, what it means, and whether there are people in tech that can come up through that path as well.
Yeah, absolutely. It's one of those things, and I think like when you're a young company, you're just starting out, and you're thinking about the future and where to go. Again, it's one of those things that once you decide to do something, if you're bootstrapped, you better not be doing stuff kind of haphazardly, because you'll burn your resources so fast.
Yeah. If
you decide to do something, on the other hand, like in our case, being strong in security, being strong in accessibility, being strong in apprenticeship development, then you decide to invest in it and you make it part of your culture. So you choose to do something, stick to it, put the flag in the ground, go for it, and rally everyone around that. And I think when you do that, you'll have a huge amount of success. You can always back off something if it's not the right idea. There's certainly things that, like all good tech companies, we've definitely failed at some things, and I think that's great, by the way, because it shows that you're an innovative company and that you're trying to be creative as you grow. But when you decide that something's right for your company, then stick to it and invest in it. And apprenticeships is one of those things that I think is that it's very helpful from a talent growth standpoint, particularly in this climate, where you get people who are kind of churning jobs a lot and interested in moving around. You've got to develop a right culture early on. So
it certainly sounds like throughout everything that we've been talking about this morning, that culture is one of those things that at Invotra you really, really worked on and consciously think about. I think culture and commitment are 2 words that I think for me sum up the conversation so far. If you're going to go in on something, then give it the proper care and attention it deserves. Otherwise, why are you doing it?
Absolutely, and I think it leads to how we're successful, right? Those kind of things actually, culture and the commitment that you mentioned there. Those 2 aspects are arguably the reasons that we're successful today. We've got customers who really just don't leave us. I mean, it's very rare that a customer leaves us. And I think in the enterprise market, that's for a relatively smallish company. Our turnover is in the millions of pounds, which we think is small. I think that's a mark of success. If you look at how happy our customers are and how hopefully happy we make their end users, and I think that's a really interesting thing. It's like, how do we wake up every single day and ensure that our customers are 100% happy, and really, really work hard to mitigate circumstances where they might be down on us or negative about us. So we're constantly learning from our customers and trying to make sure that our customers succeed at every turn.
No, I think that's really interesting. And one thing I kind of wondered and wanted to ask as well is, when you are taking on those kind of enterprise clients of that size, I imagine that each of those clients is going to be coming with something different. They're not all going to be wanting exactly the same thing. They're going to have their own unique requirements, their unique ways of working, and their unique ways of communicating internally as well, and therefore what they need of your platform. How do you kind of cope with the what is kind of at the core, but also then the differences between those clients?
Yeah, good question. Well, I mean, a really good case in point is Sierra Club over in America. I'm trying to think if I'm no longer the only American in our company. So, there's another American in our company now. But I'm trying to think, there's lots of differences, for instance, between British culture and American culture, and most of it's all good fun. And so understanding those nuances between American culture and British culture, or more progressive cultures versus more conservative cultures. So if I could highlight that Home Office in the UK is an extraordinarily conservative, risk-averse culture, and I don't think I'm saying anything out of turn by saying that. They've got their remit is to protect our borders and to protect our national security, and so Home Office, by their very setup and definition, is going to be. They're going to be a lot more conservative and risk-averse. On the flip side, you've got somebody like Sierra Club, who is a progressive organization. They're an NGO. They are, funded by charitable donations across North America and the world, and their goal is to progressively push an environmental agenda. And I think that their very makeup and definition is one where you would expect them to be very progressive and less risk averse than some of your customers. So I think I mentioned, persona development, and thinking about your customers and what they do, why they wake up and they go to work, what challenges them, why do they choose to do the thing they do, and then also how do they get it done, and what do they then expect you to be like. Those are all really, really massive considerations. I think you've got to be able to be finely tuned to listening to your customers, and to develop customer success programs means that you've got to be really adept at reading the room with them and understanding what they need.
I see.
So, yeah.
Yeah, no, that makes a lot of sense, and sounds like there's kind of that continuation of that culture that you spoke to before, about really understanding the personas within your clients and taking the time and care to appreciate what they're trying to achieve as well.
Yeah, absolutely. It's paramount. And I think when we look at basically why are we successful with our customers? Why do we have nearly 100% retention? We work incredibly hard. I think, again, being a bootstrap company working in the enterprise market versus a pure play, I think if you're a pure SaaS, there's kind of almost an expectation. If you look at various VC SaaS models, they are, there's always going to be churn. People are going to leave you. And it could be quite natural churn, just to be absolutely clear. It could be that somebody's just moved on. They don't need the product anymore. The product did one thing and they've done it now and they don't need it anymore. So the churn model is kind of baked into the pure SaaS model. If you're in the enterprise world, you feel pain, right? If you lose an enterprise customer, you wake up and you find out that you've lost a customer with 5,000 end users, you'll feel it, and
Yeah.
particularly you'll feel it in your bank account if basically you're a bootstrap company. And so you have to be finely tuned to what makes your customers succeed, and are you delivering a product and a service that really matches their expectations? You can't win every battle, but you certainly can try. And I think that when it comes to listening to your customers and helping them succeed, building great customer success teams is something that is absolutely essential to our success.
Yeah, no, I think that's really good point. And I think as well as it's kind of clear that your company culture, but also your platform is all hinges around communication and effective communication and collaboration. And you mentioned the kind of pandemic test and trace earlier as well. And one thing as well I'd like to just ask you briefly as well is, during the last couple of years, obviously we've seen a lot of changes in terms of the way that people are working as well as obviously then communicating. I was just kind of curious as to how you've kind of felt the impact of that and what changes you've had to make to your products to cater for changes in working patterns these days.
Yeah, great question. So I'll take that in two parts. So one is basically, what do we do internally? And from a product standpoint, then what changed about our product? So internally, we were already fairly well equipped to deal with remote working. We have several offices we've got 3 main offices around the country. We're just outside of London here in Surrey, in a town called Woking. We also have offices up in Newcastle in the northeast of the UK and in Dublin, Ireland. And the first thing that happened with lockdown, of course, everyone had to work from home. What it did was it actually brought us closer to our satellite offices. So folks in Newcastle, They kind of went, hang on, this is actually really good. We're now more connected to the company than we've ever been.
I see.
And so there were some definite positives there. I think there were some significant challenges as well, as everyone went through.
Yeah.
But I think some of the challenges that we faced were introverted people, and I'm going to generalize here, but bear with me. Introverted people effectively were okay with working from home.
Yep.
And I think extroverted people kind of really struggled. And I'm kind of extroverted. I can be introverted sometimes, but I'm mainly extroverted. And I kind of just sit at home and kind of going, I really miss, Friday night drinks with the team, or just random acts of get-togethers and that kind of thing. Or we had a table tennis table in our old office in here in Woking, and missing the odd table tennis tournaments and that kind of thing. And the serendipity of kind of relationships that you build and make in an office environment. I think people who are extroverted really, really miss that. But that said, a lot of folks actually quite comfortable, particularly in the tech world, super comfortable with working from home 24/7. And also, I think the other thing was it reinforced the fact that actually you just don't care when people work. So if you have this kind of mentality that you've got to have people punch a clock at like 9 a.m. or whatever and finish at 5, forget about it. We've got some people who are night owls and love working all night long, and you'll never hear from them all throughout the day, and that's absolutely fine. So I think it kind of helped, the weirdness of the lockdown helped actually kind of reinforce a good culture of saying it doesn't really matter to the individual. If it doesn't matter to the individual, it doesn't really matter to us. What really matters to us is, how do we get a job done, and how do we work together to make that happen? From a product standpoint, I think actually there's clearly, you saw this from the very word go, right? In, what was it, March of, can't even think about it, 2019, I guess it was, when video conferencing really skyrocketed, and you saw the likes of Zoom and Microsoft Teams and Google Hangouts all exploding. And so video conferencing was a massive thing. And we obviously have felt the need to look at that way, the way that video technologies are kind of augmenting internal communication. So we're looking at that in our product as we speak. What do we do from an integration standpoint? Why are we choosing to go with the vendors that we're going with, or partnering with the folks that we're partnering with? That kind of thing. One of the other things I think that from a product standpoint that we're really, I think, excited about actually is that we had, our product was based on Drupal. We talked about Drupal at the beginning of the conversation.
Yeah.
We had a lot of we had what I would call a monolithic architecture. From a Drupal standpoint, and we've had to introduce all sorts of other services into the product, and we did that really effectively during lockdown. So we're migrating to a microservice world, lots of different sort of services that actually make sense from a tech standpoint, that are integrated into the product now. Obviously, React, Node.js, all sorts of sort of features and functionality that are sort of more reliant on those services rather than Drupal, for instance.
Yeah.
So we're doing a Drupal migration. We're doing a migration from monolithic to sort of a microservices kind of world. And I think those are all kind of accelerated during lockdown when arguably you had more time to think and to be reflective about where your product's going sometimes, if that makes sense.
Yeah, I think a lot of businesses actually saw that as an opportunity to reflect and work out what actually it was that they were really, really good at, and therefore what direction do they want to take things. And I think it's given that space. And I think now we're seeing, hybrid is the kind of the word of the moment, hybrid working. And I think we're seeing people trying to balance letting people get the work done however they want to get the work done, with the other side of things still trying to maintain a very strong culture. And I think if you go too far in one direction or the other, you sacrifice one of those. I think it is a balancing act to get those right.
Absolutely. Yeah. Cool.
No, I think that's really interesting. Can I hear your perspective on that, both from an internal point of view as well as from a customer point of view? Kind of been aware we've been talking for a little while. I think we've covered quite a few really, really interesting points as well. I think there's a lot for listeners today to take away from the podcast, certainly in terms of addressing enterprise clients, what that looks like, the bootstrapping journey and reasons for making that choice. But before we kind of wrap up, where's Invotra heading next? What does the future look like from this point forwards over the coming year or so?
We've got a very strong growth strategy. We are very focused on maintaining our presence in the public sector. And so you'll see growth in terms of public sector growth, particularly in central government, expansion probably in NHS. We do a huge amount of work with local authorities. And then secondarily, I think you'll see us expand dramatically into private sector. And again, our sweet spot in private sector are going to be those who've got a lot of synergies with the kind of product and team that we've developed at Invotra. So those kind of entities which have a real care or a need around performance, scalability, security, when it comes to their internal communication needs, those are the private sector customers that we're probably looking at from a sweet spot standpoint. They could be anybody, right? They could be banking and regulation. They could be big media. They could be anyone who feels that they've got some sort of cybersecurity vulnerability that they're interested in maintaining and protecting. Anyone who's got a security consciousness. So that's kind of where we're headed, is looking at sort of private sector growth as well, where there's a lot of synergies with who we are today.
No, that makes a lot of sense. And yeah, I'm sure if you carry the culture and the values that you've already described ahead, I'm sure that will go extremely well indeed. And I can imagine a lot of growth there. And yeah, thank you for sharing all of this with us this morning. Is there anything else you'd like to kind of leave our audience with before we wrap things up?
No, I don't think so. I think we've covered a lot, Matt, and it's been a real pleasure talking with you today. And I wish you guys all the best at your podcast, and look forward to it. And I'm obviously going to be listening in on what the other startups that you've got on your program, what they do, and how they manage their growth, because it's really a fascinating subject.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's great to see so much kind of diversity in terms of the businesses that we have on, the kind of the clients, but also the ways of working. And yeah, I think we've covered a lot of really valuable lessons and points today. So thank you again for your time. Much appreciated.
Absolute pleasure, Matt. Thank you so much.
Thank you for joining me on this episode of Inside the Scale Up. Remember, for the show notes and in-depth resources from today's guest, you can find these on the website insidethescaleup.com. You can also leave feedback on today's episode, as well as suggest guests and companies you'd like to hear from. Thank you for listening.